So rain has been the talk of the town in Formula 1 lately, and I thought I'd cover a race that was rain affected and produced an unlikely, if very popular winner. A winner that didn't get his winner's trophy until 2 weeks later. And that race is the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix. Now as a season, 2003 was, well, it was pretty good. Ferrari, Williams and McLaren all having drivers that could have taken the title. Schumacher, Raikkonen and Montoya doing battle. But it would be a season of controversy as later on that season the Michelin tyres came up for debate, and there were a couple of questionable penalties later on in that season too. The cars looked good, they sounded good, and if you're going to get rose tinted about a season, this one is probably one you get a free pass for. The Brazilian Grand Prix this year was the third round in a 16 round season, the race before being the Malaysian Grand Prix, which makes things confusing as I'm sure many of you watching now are used to seeing the Brazilian Grand Prix at the end of the season as opposed to the start. I mean, I'm so old that the Brazilian Grand Prix was once the opening race of the season. It also took place 2 weeks after the Malaysian Grand Prix, during which time the teams did some testing in Spain to try out some upgrades. Oh, how things have changed. McLaren was trying to iron out some aero issues with the car, while at the same time Ferrari was under intense scrutiny by the Italian press, because the 2003 season wasn't the one-sided demolition run that 2002 had been. Ferrari only had 16 points for the season, with Schumacher and Barrichello both being on 8, and Schumacher was actually outside of the top 5 going into this race. Also in this interim period, the FIA issued a note to all teams and competitors that anybody not using a hands device would not be allowed to race, even if you had a specific medical reason to not wear one like Rubens Barrichello had done at the previous round. It was now, you're wearing one, no ifs, ands or buts. Now interestingly, the hands device had been made mandatory in NASCAR before it had been made mandatory in Formula 1. Barrichello would either have to make do with being in discomfort with his hernia or not race, while Justin Wilson had to have all new seatbelts fitted and a new hands device due to him suffering a pinched nerve that paralysed both of his arms. And since this race is about the whole wet weather stuff, we have to look at the qualifying session as well. And the first qualifying session, because there were 2 over the course of the weekend, was very wet. Very wet to the point that Jarno Trulli, Michael Schumacher and David Coulthard, the 3 senior leaders within the GPDA, passed around a petition, basically saying to the FIA, we are not going out because it's too wet, and we will refuse to drive if it stays like this. Now pretty much all of the drivers signed this petition, the only non-signatory being Jacques Villeneuve. I think there might have been another 1 or maybe 2, but the whole thing was chucked out eventually because the rain subsided and the track started to dry out. So the qualifying system in 2003 was a bit different to how it is now. I looked at the 2005 system last time out, but this was slightly similar. While in 2005 it was originally aggregate times dumped for a single session of one-shot YOLO laps, in 2003 it was the best time over 2 sessions. Similar to how it was in 1994-1995, but it was still one-shot YOLO style. On Friday, the drivers would go out one at a time in reverse championship order. The last place driver would go out first, and the top driver last. Although you could make an argument so that it should be the other way around to balance the field. But on the plus side, it meant guaranteed TV time for every single driver and their sponsors. On the Saturday, they'd go out again, but in the order that they qualified. So again, last driver was first, fastest last. But this time, they'd carry their starting fuel loads, which sort of went against the whole spirit of qualifying. Low fuel, fastest lap wins. So with this system in place, Barrichello put his car on pole ahead of Coulthard with Schumacher down in 7th, while Webber was on course for pole in his Jag but ended up 3rd. The top 4 separated by just over half a tenth. Proper close stuff. Raikkonen and Villeneuve were then allowed to change their engines after cracks were detected. As established at the top of this video, this race was very, very wet. So wet in fact that the 2 PM start time, that's local time, was chucked aside and the whole thing delayed for 15 minutes. Then the rain started to ease a little bit, so they actually went out behind the safety car, but the problem was there was a massive river of water going across turn 3. So they just kept going round and round and round behind the safety car. After the safety car finally came in, Raikkonen blitzed past everybody and stormed off into the lead, taking Webber, Coulthard and Barrichello on the way. But when a safety car came out, everybody pitted except for Kimi, and when he finally did, he was down to 9th, so had to carve his way back through once again. The safety car was called out because Ralph Firma's Jordan had suffered suspension damage, and being able to slow down, he wiped out Panis' Toyota. But in the process, he miraculously missed Fisichello's car, while at the same time Justin Wilson had aquaplaned at turn 3 and gone into the wall. Charlie Whiting, the race director, was quite concerned about turn 3. Because of the way it was cambered, it meant that the water was running onto the track as opposed to away from it, like it was at virtually every other corner on the track. And while the track was starting to dry out a little bit, there was still that issue of aquaplaning, and no fewer than 6 drivers went off at turn 3 over the course of the race. The most surprising of all being then 5-time champion Michael Schumacher. Schumacher had worked his way up to 3rd by lap 16, the next lap being when the Furman and Wilson crashes had happened. But on lap 25, Montoya had had the same accident as Wilson, and Pitsonia also went off the road, smacking Montoya's car as he bounced off the tyre wall. 2 laps later, Schumacher was off, almost hitting the Marshal that was trying to help the Jag and the Williams. It was his first retirement since the 2001 German Grand Prix, and his first driver error retirement since Jerez 97? Failing that, Monaco 1996. In all, it was Wilson, Montoya, Pitsonia, Schumacher, Button and Verstappen that got caught out by the water at turn 3, but the Bridgestone runners were doing better than the Michelins at this point, because the track was starting to get that little better, but with turn 3 still being RNG on whether you got through alive or not. Michelin had also brought full wet tyres, while Bridgestone had brought intermediates, due to a bizarre rule dictating that you could only bring 1 compound of wet tyres to a race. So it looked like, with people like the Michael and JPM out of the race, and Williams and McLaren running on inferior Michelins for the conditions, it looked like Barrichello might actually finally win the Brazilian Grand Prix. And when Barrichello took the lead on lap 45, the crowd went mental. But 2 laps later, they were silent. Barrichello's Ferrari had developed a problem with the fuel computer, and the car crawled to a halt down the straight between turns 3 and 4. Rubens would take 3 poles at Interlagos but would never win there once in his career. The race he always wanted to win too, and actually said that he would continue racing until he won the Brazilian Grand Prix. Basically, the issue was that Barrichello's in-car computer was telling him and the Ferrari pit wall that the car had something in the region of 12 litres or 3.2 US gallons of fuel, when in reality it had none. So he'd run out of fuel, basically. By this point in the race lead had swapped between Raikkonen, Coulthard and Barrichello, but quietly the Jordan of Giancarlo Fisichella was now running in 3rd on Bridgestone tyres, which then became 2nd when Coulthard pitted. The other big names in this race were further back than they should have been. Coulthard's stop had put him in 4th, and Alonso had recovered to 3rd after Barrichello dropped out, having dropped away down the field after Renault had accidentally put slicks on for his first pit stop, and then he copped a penalty for overtaking under yellows. Fisichella had gone for the Panis Monaco 1996 strategy. After the safety car pulled in, they pulled Fizzy in, filled his car up to the top and basically no-stopped him to the end, as the Bridgestone intermediate tyres would last forever and the conditions were never going to dry out properly. The idea was thought of by Rob Smedley, who was just a young engineer at that time, and Gary Anderson said, "Okay, you can do that, but you're doing it with just Giancarlo's car, and if it goes wrong, it's on you." Fizzy, meanwhile, wasn't convinced, but Smedley finally won him over. Anderson, meanwhile, was egging Smedley on to go through with it, with Smedley thinking, "Oh man, if this doesn't get pulled off, I'm getting one hell of a bollocking after this." Fisichella was doing the whole race on 1 set of tyres, only stopping for that fuel after the safety car came in. Coulthard pitted on lap 52, but with Raikkonen and Fisichella being so marginal on fuel, barring any late race drama, it was basically Coulthard's win. Speaking of which, on lap 53, Raikkonen went wide at turn 4 and Fisichella took the lead. At the end of that same lap, Webber dropped it on a wet patch coming out of Glock corner and smashed his Jag up in weirdly the same spot he'd smashed up his Porsche in the World Endurance Championship. Raikkonen and Fisichella managed to get through, and Raikkonen had to pit for fuel to make it to the end of the race, while Fizzy went round again. But the race was red flagged, as when Alonso came through, he hit one of Webber's Michelins and that speared him off into the opposite tyre wall, spraying debris all over the track. Since there was so much wreckage and 75% of the race had been completed, the race was declared end of lap 55. There was further drama because nobody knew who had won. It was then compounded because Fisichella's car burst into flames the second he pulled into Parc Ferme. So he got Ron Dennis thinking that McLaren had won. Eddie Jordan thought Jordan and Fisichella had won the race instead, and Eddie was actually spending the prize money in his mind already. But then as Kimi was being weighed, he was told, "You're the winner," so Fisichella and Raikkonen went up onto the podium. But they were the only two there. Alonso was classified in 3rd, but because he was in the hospital, he couldn't make it. And if you watch the highlights on YouTube, on the official F1 YouTube channel, you'll see that there is a very dejected Eddie Jordan being consoled by a quite happy Ron Dennis. But then it was all up in the air. The FIA wasn't happy with the timing sheets that Tag Heuer had provided them with, and Charlie Whiting began a formal investigation just to make sure that the timekeeping was all up to scratch. They later found that there'd been an error, and data provided by Jordan confirmed it. Smedley had actually put the case together on the flight back from Brazil to England, and the meeting was over very, very quickly. They took one look at the timing at Heathrow Airport and went, "Oh, yeah, you did win." The rule is that they go from the start of the lap at which the race is abandoned and go back 2 laps. The tag system had glitched out, saying that Fisichella had started lap 55 when the red flag was called. Going back to the end of lap 52, Raikkonen was in the lead, and that's why he was declared the winner. But the Jordan system said that Fisichella had started lap 56 when the red flag was called, and that the race result should have been taken for when Fisichella started lap 54 instead. Fisichella had ended lap 53 in the lead of the Grand Prix as he'd overtaken Kimi at turn 4, meaning that he was, a mile or so from not having that victory. A very fine margin. At least, that's how I've calculated it anyway. Either way, Kimi's mistake led to Fizzy's win. I've probably got it wrong and it's probably a lap either side, but I think you get the idea. At the following Grand Prix at Imola, Fisichella finally received his winner's trophy in a little ceremony set up on the starting grid. Raikkonen formally handed over the trophy to Fisichella, and also Ron Dennis formally handed over the Constructors' Trophy to Eddie Jordan, meaning that this race was won about 2 weeks after it ended. It would be the final win for Jordan, but the first win for Fisichella. It was a popular win, an overdue win, but also a bittersweet win, because within 2 years of that win, Jordan was gone. Although, Force India, Racing Point, and now Aston Martin's carried on that lineage, and Sergio Perez would win at Sakir, not Bahrain, Sakir, in 2020. So then, a look at the chaotic Brazilian Grand Prix. If you've learned something new here today, or if it's just expanded on what you may have seen on TV at the time, then do give the video a like, and for more stuff like this, get subscribed with the bell on, so never miss out on anything I do here. Massive thanks to the kind folk at Patreon for the support, and if you want to help out in the purchasing of images for these videos, the link to Patreon is down in the description, as well as links to Discord and stuff, although there is super thanks if monthly donations aren't your thing, and you just want to buy me a coffee or a beer or whatever. So until next time, I've been AdmiralLaWind, have a great day wherever you live in the world, and I'll see you all again soon for another video. Goodbye.